The following documentary relays content that some viewers may find distressing, as well as some flashing images. Viewer discretion is advised. Most people trusted the verdict. It was widely publicised, but the trial of Lucy Letby, under more careful scrutiny, could be a prime example of the legal fault lines. The evidence the jury had to work with was curated, although the public were kept busy with the grisly facts which were only revealed during the 9 months of testimony. The case was often missing key context. Several FOI reports, which may have only been released after the trial started, were never permitted as evidence, even though they shake the foundation of the prosecution's argument. The soundbite we heard time and time again, that Lucy was the only one present for all the events. A trial of this nature wouldn't fly without some authority, and among the some 250 witnesses called, 4 external medical witnesses held the spotlight, with Dowie Evans as the most senior and supposedly experienced. He was the one who first approached the police investigation to offer his services, and is, of course, a paid mouthpiece. He's a paediatrician, not a neonatologist, and has made a profitable career from accusing acts of deliberate harm in court, where he has both asserted and denied being an expert. He's a medical doctor, but has, in the past, been involved with the diagnosis of Munchausen's by proxy, which is a psychiatric condition and outside of his expertise. He has overseen the removal of children from their parents' care numerous times, and has never once, upon reviewing a case of suspected harm, sided with the defendant. He always pulls for the prosecution.
I received a copy of the clinical notes of over 30 babies who had either died or had collapsed between January 2015 and July 2016. And I looked at all of them. Some of these cases, you could understand why the babies that died. They died from the usual problems of small babies, hemorrhage, infection, some congenital problem, for instance.
Note that Evans here reveals the true number of infants initially investigated. This is also confirmed in the early articles from the Nursing Times, which reported 32 cases prior to Letby's name being released. From the cases reviewed, Dr. Evans claims to have disregarded those suffering with the usual problems. But if you remember the medical testimony from the trial, you know that most of the infants Lucy was charged with did also suffer from infection, hemorrhage, and congenital problems. Pneumonia was implicated in the death of child C, sepsis in the case of D. E died of fatal internal hemorrhaging. G and J both had prior history of infection and hemorrhaging disorders respectively. K had a lung infection, N had congenital haemophilia, and O, P and Q all showed signs of either sepsis or NEC. Something doesn't add up. There are 15 more infants who didn't get their day in court, and the ones who did, children A through Q as we knew them, don't exactly match Evans' own criteria for deliberate harm. The omission of those 15 victims from the table presented to the jury and the public means the correlation it draws is worthless. Here are the 26 critical incidents as they were presented in the trial. We don't know how many separate incidents happened concerning the 15 babies omitted, but rather than guesswork, let's consolidate the multiple events for the individual infants. That leaves us with 17, A through Q. Now, let's see them all together. While the nursing rotas for the omitted infants are a mystery, we know from cross-examination that children C, D, H, J, K, M and N all had incidents outside of Lucy's hours. That leaves us with an estimated presence at events of about 41%. Lucy, on average, worked 60-hour weeks, which puts her presence at the ward around 36%. Even at a minimum estimation of Lucy's working hours, this doesn't break the 20% deviation that is usually cited as being statistically significant. Small datasets are actually prone to greater deviations than this. Her presence, when you take this into consideration, seems totally average. When the prosecution made the original table, it was filtered to show only what they wanted you to see and what they were trying to prove. They gave the public and the jury only a fraction of the picture. Taken out of context, it looked convincing. But it's hard to believe the prosecution didn't know that cherry-picking data to support your conclusion is both unscientific and duplicit at best. And even by drawing the circle around Lucy, they couldn't neatly bring the death toll down into the national average, or the ward's previous numbers. Even without those Lucy supposedly murdered, it was still double that of prior years. Clusters like this are a known phenomenon, especially when dealing with viral infection. But the prosecution deflected from this by pushing the theory that air embolism was the real cause of death. The X-rays were in front of me, several of them, all showing air in the baby's vessels. That's when I thought, no, it has to be, and it has to be deliberate. The images were never released to the public, but Dr. Bowen tells us here that the air bubbles are in the vessels. She doesn't specify that they're in the heart. Child D, for example, had multiple X-rays taken after her first collapse, all appearing normal, no signs of embolism. In fact, Child D's first collapse happened moments after birth, while she was in her father's arms. When she did unfortunately die, the body was transferred to Alderhay for the final X-rays, almost an hour's drive from the Countess of Chester, with the ill-placed central line left in the whole time. In the very paper Evans used for reference in the trial, it warns against using post-mortem imaging for diagnosis, and states that air bubbles can form in the venous system as fast as 25 minutes after death. Yet Lucy was convicted on this charge. It was debated in trial, 11th of November 2022, with witnesses saying that for Child D, the latter X-rays showed signs of infection had subsided. However, that only refers to pneumonia. Sepsis isn't detectable by radiology and won't show signs on an X-ray. And that strange rash that was discussed as an indicator of the condition was also a red herring. While the jury had a glossary of terms, the real difference between mottling and purpurea wasn't well explained in the trial. Caroline Oakley, a neonatal nurse of 20 years, was well acquainted with the difference and said for Child D, the rash displayed was more localized. It was a deep red-brown, different from mottling, different from what I'd seen before. And the flitting, mottled or lividoid pattern that the junior doctors and nurses seemed so shocked by is actually the far more common and benign cutis marmorata. And cutis marmorata can be a symptom of air embolism, but it's often seen in newborns as a mere reaction to cold conditions. A purpuric rash, in Child D's case, is more indicative of sepsis, also inferred by the blue, dusky or purple colouring that was noted consistently throughout the first-hand reports. Purpuric rashes are usually blotchy, but during the COVID pandemic, some visual symptoms associated with a viral infection were similar to what Oakley may have been describing, a darker, localized reticular pattern. So if air bubbles weren't being deliberately injected, if there was no abuse happening, why did several of the babies who were improving and deemed ready to go home suddenly collapse? If you don't know the NICU personally, you may have seen from the media coverage that preterm infants are kept in filtered incubators. But let's look again at the evidence. Remember this? It's the scene in which Lucy noted Child I looking pale, where she was questioned about how on earth she could have seen such a thing from the doorway at night. That distracted anyone from asking the other question. Where is the protection here? Not every child in the NICU needs to be incubated, but these filtered containers were protecting the younger babies from pathogens in the ward. The viral theory was oddly dismissed during the trial, but when the babies were getting better, stronger and ready to go home, they were being moved to these open-topped cots, hand-fed and exposed to the elements. So, why did the deaths stop when Lucy was moved to clerical duties in 2016? A little digging reveals this. The same month that Lucy was removed from nursing duties, in August of 2016, the ward stopped taking infants born below 32 weeks. They downgraded from around 16 beds, taking as many as 20 when running over capacity, to just 12 to 13, ending the ward's status as a level 2 facility, which it's claimed it didn't have the staffing levels for at the time. These were not quiet years in terms of perinatal legislation either. Embrace was founded in 2013, and the government had just set up the Saving Babies' Lives Care Bundle, and both were on board with the government initiative to reduce stillbirth rates. However, there's also some evidence that the national statistics weren't accurate to begin with. In 2022, the Telegraph published an article discussing the investigation into their nasty habit of recording early neonatal deaths as stillbirths. The National Health Service themselves were skewing the numbers, and it's not hard to see why. A financial compensation system is in place for the families of children who die in neonatal care, but not for those of whom are stillborn. And in addition to the standardised payouts, one family was awarded £8.5 million in a criminal negligence suit against the hospital, also in 2016, just before the senior doctors pushed for the police investigation against Lucy. But it still doesn't explain the sheer volume of fatalities the Countess saw in 2015. Stillbirths and neonatal deaths rose in tandem. However, both the Central Labour Suite and the neonatal unit were affected by the floods. Raw sewage from the hospital septic system covered and led to the quarantine of several rooms on more than one occasion. The plumber, Mr Mansutti, gave details of the times he was called to the two units in court, June 14th. Although he was not outspoken about supporting a woman who was coming to be known as Britain's worst child killer, it becomes very clear when comparing the dates given that rather than following Lucy from day to night shift, the deaths actually followed the sewage problems. Starting with a service report for blocked drains in the Labour Suite on July 4th, 2015, followed by 3 stillbirths that same month. Not every single death followed a plumbing complaint, and not every plumbing complaint was correlated with death, but the clusters of 2 or 3 deaths in quick succession were always close to one of these service reports. Prenatal care was not Lucy's department, so if the stillbirths were indeed stillbirths, or lives lost before they left the Labour Suite, they were happening before contact with the now convicted nurse.
Oh, she was an extremely clever criminal. She almost got away with it, and they may well deny it, but for the consultants actually pressing and demanding that the police got involved, I think she could well have got away with this, because